Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to the Hearthstone Weekly Show. Haven't said that in a while. I've been busy, but anyway, for this week's episode, I'll be doing a deck tech and deck sort of rundown of Oil Rogue. Now, this particular list I will credit to Kolento. It's the deck I think he got #1 legend with on EU. I've been trying out a few tech cards here or there, but this is his base list, and we'll go through some of the other stuff that I've been trying out at the end of the video. Anyway, so what is Oil Rogue for those who don't know? Now, Oil Rogue has recently been heralded to be one of the best decks in the game since Undertaker got nerfed. Not quite sure what happened there. I think it was more just deck building decisions where people finally figured it out as opposed to a case of it just wasn't good before. But Oil Rogue is a deck that harkens back to the tempo style Miracle decks, although it is not Miracle. It just isn't. It doesn't play the same way. The reason I say it harkens back to them is because it is very known for ending the game with a massive burst of damage because of its namesake card, Tinker's Sharpsword Oil, which will deal 6 for 4 mana. It's basically Fireball in this deck. However, you can also use it with Blade Flurry, and then you get 3 extra damage out of it, and Spell Power just makes it ridiculous. So that's where it gets the name of the deck from. The rest of it is pretty much supporting creatures. Yes, I did say that. Supporting creatures with the spells. Anyway, so without further ado, let's get started with the cheap spells at the top of the deck list here. So Backstab, pretty much given in rogue decks. Cheap early removal, helps deal with some of the aggro decks, or just deal 3 damage with your hero power. Preparation is in this deck because you have so many spells, and it's basically just Innervate for 3 mana in this deck half the time. So very, very powerful. Not to mention you are running Sprint for card draw, and Prep Sprint is insane. Deadly Poison, again a given rogue removal card, also helps with Blade Flurry. Southsea Deckhand. Now this is one of those deck design decisions that you have to make when making an Oil Rogue deck. I've tried with and without Deckhand. I personally don't like it, even though it's good. I don't like playing with Deckhand, even though it does do some serious work as a one-off. Now, basically, why is Deckhand in the deck? Besides being an extra copy of Backstab, which is always helpful, it is very good at comboing Sharpsword Oils and doing massive amounts of damage straight from the hand later on in the game. Very, very good top deck. Because if you go Southsea Deckhand and you have a weapon up, like if you just have your dagger up and you go Southsea Deckhand and Tinker Sharpsword Oil, then congratulations, you just hit him in the face for 9 damage. For 5 mana, and you can also combo that with a bunch of other stuff. I've actually seen double Sharpsword Oils after a deckhand, and that gets a bit ridiculous. I mean, if you think about it, you've got 3 from just weapon and deckhand, and then plus 12 from the oils, 15 damage from the hand, and you can get hands like that pretty easily because of the sprints. So deckhand, it's personal preference whether or not you like him, but he has proven to be quite good. It feels a bit like Unstable Portal. Very good card, but a lot of people don't run it because it's really annoying to run sometimes. Anyway, Blade Flurry, arguably the best card in the deck from time to time. It basically does very unfair AoE swings. It just does. It actually reminds me of Savagery from Alpha. It's basically the same thing now because of all the weapon buffs. So basically, for anyone who doesn't know, Savagery used to be basically Blade Flurry. In fact, it was. It was 2 mana Blade Flurry. And they had Bite and Claw were cheaper. And they just added more attack. So it's basically that's what it is. And because of Sharpsword Oil, you get some ridiculous Blade Flurry combos. Largest one I've got so far was 9. But yeah, you get some insanely large AoEs. And it does basically function as a Flame Strike that Pyroblasts your opponent in this deck. Eviscerate. Burst damage, removal, pretty much all round. Sap. Now, most decks in history have not run 2 saps. The reason why this deck runs 2 saps is because you're going for burst. Unlike Miracle Rogue, like from pre-Gadgets and Nerf really, unlike Miracle Rogue, which sometimes run 1 sap, although a lot would run 2, you could go for a long game because you had the damage combo and you could just sap their taunt when you needed to combo off, and you could draw through your entire deck with Auctioneer, and that was different. However, you really need the saps to get past taunts and even just to deal with big things like Ragnaros. Now, some versions do run Big Game Hunter. I've tried it. It's good. Big Game Hunter is just good in general. This version is running Shade instead of Big Game Hunter for the extra 3 drop. Anyway, Sap, very, very good tempo swing. Blood Mage Thalnos, haven't seen this guy in a while. Now, Blood Mage is absolutely ridiculous in Rogue. In fact, the two classes he is strongest in are arguably Rogue and Shaman. In Rogue, he's stronger. Why? Because you have Preparation and Backstab, giving you zero cost spells that you can spell power boost. He also cycles himself, which is very relevant. And I have got lethal with a sharp sworded Blood Mage Thalnos, which is quite funny. I mean, 4 damage is just amusing off a 2-drop. But anyway, so Blood Mage, pretty much the unsung hero of this deck. He actually does a lot of work, and the spell power, or sorry, spell damage. It's taken me a year to get used to that, and I still haven't. But anyway, the spell damage is very, very good with things like Blade Flurry and Backstab being the two notable ones, and Eviscerate to get past Sludge Belcher. That comes up a lot. Fan of Knives, because you need more AoE. It's not as good as Flurry, but it cycles itself, and you need more AoE. Now, Fan of Knives wins over Shiv because 1+ mana. And it's only 1+ mana in some situations because you can prep it, and they'll both cost 0, but this one does it in an AoE, and because you're running 3 spell power minions, it is actually pretty decent to AoE from time to time. Helps against Hunter a lot. Speaking of helps against Hunter, Earthring Farseer, which at this point might as well be made a rogue card. Earthring Farseer has a history of landing itself in rogue decks. Why? Because you deal a lot of damage to yourself with your hero power. And it's also a bit of a commonly known fact that rogues use 3/3s the best. They just do. Their 3/3s can get buffed. 3 mana 3/3, you've got Backstab, Eviscerates to protect them, or build up on their damage. They can trade up with your hero power and deadly poisons. So 3/3s very, very good in Rogue, and this one heals you, which is not as good as the other 3/3 in the deck, but it's still pretty good and helps against the aggro decks, particularly Face Hunter. Shade of Naxxramas. Now, I was trying Big Game Hunter at first. I've also tried Shade. I'm not sure what's better. Shade is by far better against the slower decks, which a lot of people think that doesn't make any sense. Now, the reason for it is actually because if you get turn 3 Shade against a deck that just can't handle a turn 3 Shade, you're going to get a lot of free damage in, and that's just ridiculous. Now, the reason the deck doesn't run 2, partly because no space, and secondly because you really don't want 1 late game. I mean, you don't want 2 in your deck because you might top deck them more often, whereas sprinting into 1 and drawing it as one of your 4 cards is actually fine, but drawing it as your top deck multiple times in a row is just miserable. Although it does work with Sharp Sword Oil when it's in stealth, so that's a plus, but you have deckhand in the deck for that kind of combination. So it's basically in here to be an absolute monster on turn 3 or 2. I have seen some versions running Edwin Van Cleef instead. The Cleef is still around. He's been going in and out of the metagame for a while now, but Edwin Van Cleef is a very, very viable card in here because you can make him a 6/6 very easily. The one problem with running Edwin Van Cleef is that him and Shade have a similar function, but one of them has stealth. The other one's bigger, but you need to invest cards into it. So the real decider is one of them has stealth. So I do prefer Shade, and the other reason for it is almost everyone's running Big Game Hunter right now, which means, let's be honest, the Cleef is only getting to a 6/6. He's not getting bigger, because if you make him bigger, he's just going to die. And that does happen with oils a lot. If you want to go for an oil on something, unless it's a 3/3, so it becomes 6 attack, it's going to get Big Game Hunter. It just happens. So I definitely think Shade is better than Edwin Van Cleef, but again, personal preference. SI7 Agent, one of the best cards in the deck, and one of the best minions in the entire game. Always has been, and probably always will be. A 3 mana 3/3 that deals 2 damage on a Battlecry is just ridiculous. It really is. SI7 Agent will single-handedly destroy aggro decks if you're going second. Going SI7 Agent on their 2-drop is brutal, because it will then kill their 3-drop. You can also go Backstab SI for 4 damage, or if you have 5 mana, you can Hero Power and kill a Sludge Belcher. With a Battle Cry, 3 damage to the face, and a Backstab. And then the SI7 kills the token. It's not like you're losing the 3/3. So being able to trade up like that is what makes SI7 so good. Sharp Sword Oil we kind of talked about already, but basically massive damage boost. Really did help out the double flurry decks, and it was overlooked massively, but it just allows you to pull off these ridiculous flurry combos, which Rogue just couldn't do before, because there wasn't enough weapon support in the class, weirdly enough. But yeah, there wasn't enough weapon support in the class, so if you didn't have Assassin's Blade, you couldn't pull off ridiculous flurry combos. Some of these decks do run Assassin's Blade. I personally think it's a bit clunky, but it does help against Warrior, which is arguably the deck's worst matchup. But yeah, Sharp Sword Oil, All-Star in the deck. Gets a bit awkward when you draw multiples early in the game, but when you get them later in the game with preps, it's just what lets you close out the game so fast. On to the core creatures. We have 5 core creatures for the mid-game. Violet Teacher, also known as the kill immediately target, otherwise you will get an army of tokens facing you. Violet Teacher turns out things very quickly in this deck because you have Sprint to keep spells in your hand, along with preps and backstabs and deadly poisons, and they're all very cheap. So you will frequently get boards full of tokens, and every time you get 2 Violet Teachers on the token, Violet Teacher on the board, then it just gets ridiculous. You get so many tokens, and they are a bit susceptible to AoE, but guess what? Nothing else in the deck is. Everything else is single target removal. Violet Teacher is annoying to single target removal because he has 5, or she I guess, has 5 health, which is Senjin stats, which is traditionally annoying to get rid of. But the AoE element also helps out a lot, because the rest of your stuff just isn't vulnerable to AoE, apart from, I guess, the Shade. Azure Drake. Probably the best in this deck is in any other deck in the game right now. Spell power and drawing cards and a 4/4 are all amazing in this deck. You need a creature, you need it to cycle itself so you can keep cards in your hand, and you need the spell damage. It's in one card. It's just amazing. Now, last of the minions in the deck is Lotheb. Now, as probably most of you will know by now, I am a ridiculously big fan of Lotheb because he is absolutely insane. Not to mention, this deck is almost entirely tempo-based, meaning that a Lotheb will actually cause some really stupid turns, where you can just go Sharp Sword Oil, Lotheb, and then they're pretty much toast. Because he'll deal 5 damage on his own, almost guaranteed, which is enough to close out games. 5 mana 5/5 is pretty powerful when it comes to just putting in the beats. Now, I have seen some people running another 4-drop like Piloted Shredder. I've seen that. I've seen weird ones like Mechanical Yeti. But I personally like the extra 5-drop. There's only 2 other 5-drops in the deck, so having the extra one is actually quite nice. Now, the last card in the deck is Sprint. Now, I already talked a bit about Sprint earlier, preparation. Getting Prep Sprint, 4 mana, draw 4. Yeah, that sounds fair. Well, actually, I guess you're technically drawing 3 because you used an extra prep to do it. But that's a good nourish. And you get 2 spell triggers from your Violet Teacher. So Sprint is absolutely amazing. Also, you'll often Sprint on turn 7 just to get some damage back, because you can take the tempo loss because you're going to kill them next turn most likely. So Sprint is an all-star in this deck. Now, something I want to talk about now is just kind of different variations. Now, the list I've been running has 2 sprints in it. However, you can, in fact, go ahead and run the Gadgetzan. See if I actually have a Gadgetzan anymore. I've got a feeling I may have disenchanted both of mine. Yes, I have. So yeah, you can, in fact, run the Gadgetzan and also 1 sprint, which I have seen some versions doing, which I actually think is okay. I prefer sprint, not because Gadgetzan is bad, but alright, here's the advantages and disadvantages of both. Gadgetzan needs more work to get the draw engine going. However, it is a 4/4. No, really, that's it. I guess the other thing is, like, there's things that come off of the disadvantages and advantages, where 4/4 works with Sharp Sword Oil. However, because you need to work to get it working, it's a bad top deck if you have no spells in your hand. So Sprint, much better in these top decky wards, which is actually the reason I like playing 2, because having 2 sprints is actually really nice. I also quite attached to Sprint. I was trying Prep Sprint in weird tempo decks ages ago, and it kind of worked. But this is really the deck where Sprint comes into its own. Very, very good card in this style of deck. Now, other things that I haven't tried are Sabotage. Now, Sabotage is actually surprisingly good. Mostly against Hunter. I have seen some people running Harrison Jones, but the reason I prefer Sabotage over Harrison if you want weapon destruction is because it kills a guy as well. And it's also a spell, which is not too bad, but I guess you can prep it. You can prep and then Sabotage, and you basically 2 for 2 them, but you spend 1 mana to do it. So Sabotage, quite handy, far superior to Assassinate in this kind of deck, because they probably won't have that many guys on the board. Assassinate just costs a bit too much mana as well. So Sabotage is quite nice, especially when it gets a weapon. Not running it because it does reduce the consistency of the deck a bit. It's a bit dead in certain matchups, but in others it's really, really nice. Then we've got other potential ones like Big Game Hunter instead of Shade. Basically, if you want to try and just play a bit more tempo-y and a bit less massively offensive, then you play the Big Game Hunter. But I'm not sure. I think Shade is quite good. Big Game Hunter is also quite handy, but the reason a lot of people don't run it instead of Shade, at least, and they try and fit it in somewhere else, is simply because you have a bunch of spells in your deck, which means you do have hands with nothing in them, and then Big Game Hunter gets drawn, and it's not the best 3-drop you want to be seeing. You'd rather have a different 3-drop in your deck when you have a handful of spells. However, I do think it is worth trying. Now, besides that, as I did say earlier, you can run the Shredder or some of the 4-drop instead of Loetheb, although personally I do like the Loetheb inclusion. And let's just see if I can think about anything else. Oh yeah, Assassin's Blade. Now, Assassin's Blade makes the Warrior matchup from absolutely unwinnable to almost unwinnable. And I am perfectly aware that we lost to Warrior in the Gauntlet, but I mean, we lost to Rogue as Warrior in the Gauntlet, but yeah, Assassin's Blade does help that matchup an absolute ton. The last card I want to talk about is actually Shiv. Now, Shiv does see play as a one-of. I personally prefer Double Fan of Knives, but Shiv is a good cycle card. Also helps set up Eviscerates. Getting 5 damage Eviscerate is surprisingly useful, and doesn't require as much mana as Fan of Knives. However, I think, given with the current metagame right now, you want Shiv the most against the decks with lots of tiny guys like Hunter, and Fan is just better in those situations. So, before we actually close this out, I want to talk a little bit about matchups. Now, Oil Rogue is quite a popular deck, so there's definitely going to be people playing the counter decks. Now, good matchups wise, there's Priest is pretty atrocious against it. Paladin is really bad against Oil Rogue. It's actually why Paladin's going down in popularity right now. It's okay against Handlock. I think it's favored, but not by much. It's good against Ramp Druid, not very good against Mid-Range Druid though, which is a bit of a weakness, because Mid-Range Druid I think is stronger than Ramp Druid right now. Then, besides that, Face Hunter, a lot of people think it's a bad matchup. I actually think it's a good one, if you run double Farseer. Now, you can substitute out a Farseer for a Big Game Hunter against control decks instead of the Shade, but on ladder, there's a lot of Hunters, so you kind of just want the second Earthen Ring. I've also seen people running Edwin Van Cleef over Farseer and things like that. But against Hunter, double Farseer goes a long way. Mech Mage is about 50-50, which is either good or bad, depending on whether you're expecting to play against a lot of Mech Mage. At least it can beat it and lose to it at the same time, but at least it's 50-50 and not a bad matchup. Freeze Mage is a good one. Shaman is okay, depends on how much healing they're running and how much taunt they're running. As for other kind of bad matchups, I think Zoo is about 50-50. I have seen people thinking it's a good or a bad matchup, but the worst by far, and if you notice, most of those are good matchups. Just want to point that out. Most of those are good matchups. However, there is Control Warrior. Now, I would actually say that Rogue's win rate against Control Warrior is about 15%. In my testing. That's not good. That is not good. That is not a good win rate, and you definitely don't want it. But Control Warrior is on the decline, luckily, and the reason for it is actually, and keep in mind this is ladder, not tournaments, is actually because of Druid. Combo Druid stomps Warrior, and as a result, it's less popular. So what a lot of people have been doing is they take their rogues in, and you either play Warrior to counter it, or you ban the rogue, and then you just play your mid-rangey Druids, or you ban Druid because it has insane matchups against a lot of other things. But it's a bit of a weird trifecta right now. But yeah, bad matchup would be Control Warrior, and also mid-rangey Druid. Mid-rangey Druid is good against Oil Rogue, not because it's a bad matchup for the Oil Rogue, more just because it's really powerful when it comes to doing its damage combos, so it can just race you. But anyway, before I sign off today, I want to say that I am perfectly willing to record a couple of games and put them up if people want to ask. If people ask for them, I will record some ladder games and then throw them up on the channel of me actually playing this Oil Rogue deck. But anyway, as for now, this has been Jotto. you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, put it in the comment section below. But for now, this is me signing off.